Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for the first public lecture of the Art and Music Studies program that is currently being conducted at the Global Music Institute. I'd like to extend a really warm welcome to all of the students and other guests who've joined in, and a huge thank you to Megha and Adi for setting this format and series into motion. I am Suvani. I'm an artist and researcher based in Delhi, and I'm currently facilitating the Art and Studies program at GMI. The course is being conducted for the students of performance, contemporary music performance, and production technology at GMI, with the larger intent of initiating and sort of like setting forth an expanded and critical understanding of sound, listening, and experimental form of practices that both challenge and inform the idea of the musical. So during the sessions, we've been engaging critically with sociocultural, political, historical, and philosophical perspectives. And also, we've been looking at various diverse interdisciplinary practices and creative forms that the field of sound and music has the potential to take on. So, as a part of the course this time, we sort of decided to open up the sessions to a series of guests in order to further, create, a space for conversations to unfold via their own questions and, critical engagements. So, in today's session, we are very thrilled to have with us Suhail Yusuf Khan, who's a dear friend and an accomplished musician and a now academic. Suhail is a PhD candidate in music at the Wesleyan University and a regular part-time faculty at the Hart Conservatory of Music, University of Hartford. He brings together expertise from a performance career that has extended over 20 years. And he's been fusing forms of academic research and creative experimentation to find new modes of expression in Hindustani music. His doctoral dissertation is titled Bridge Overtones Lessons from the Sarangi, and is the first in depth ethnomusicological study of the North Indian bowed instrument tradition by a hereditary Sarangi player. So Hale's performance career has been finding new modes of expression in Hindustani music, contemporary rock fusion, pop, folk, jazz, and experimental music. He's been featured on more than 15 albums and signed to Domino Records, UK. Navrasa Nine Emotions, his recent album with his band Yoxton Thorn Khan, was voted #1 in The Guardian's Best of 2020 listings. So today, Sohail's talk is going to actually take us through his own autoethnographic research and work in Hindustani music, specifically to do with the community of Sarangi players against the backdrop of modernity and colonization. His presentation will focus on critical aspects of this particular music lineage, through which he wants to shed light on the relevance of ethnomusicological research in contemporary modes of music and learning. So, Suhail, thank you so much for being with us here today and leading the session. We're very happy to have you here. And without much delay, I'll just be turning over the floor to you. And actually, before that, Adi, who will, I think, bring in some more personal introductions,
Sure,
having known
sure,
Suhail for many years. Yeah.
actually, yeah. So yeah, thank you, Suvani, for introducing this. In fact, like I want to thank and congratulate you for such a wonderful course that you've curated and you lead at GMI because I mean we take the intersection of various art forms with music, and that really fulfills our aim to bring a wider lens for the perspective of our students to just see how we can how many sort of ways that we can look at music and art and just see the various ways that it shapes us and our society in throughout history as well. So thank you for that, and it's just been a pleasure for for us to have you with us, to take this course forward. And it's a great pleasure for me actually to have Suhail here because I mean artistically, he's one of the most prolific musicians that I've known and worked with. But I mean, he's more like a brother to me because we've known each other for so many years. So, in fact, like I think I can safely say that his extended career over 20 years, I have quite a bit of intersection with my work as well. So it's really wonderful to have you here, Suhail. We go way back with when we started a band Incognito that led to Advaita, with Ujwal here as well. And we've our duo project where we did a culture code landscape, and now working with Khamira, our cross-cultural collaboration with Welsh musicians. And we've also been so fortunate to have Sohail as our tribe mentor and faculty at the Lajpat Nagar campus at GMI. So seeing Sohail in so many avatars, as a rock star, as a Sarangi player, in his classical sort of space, and now with his sort of role as an academician. So Sohail, it's just so great to see how you've grown over the years, and we're really happy for you to be here with us. So thank you so much.
Hi, good morning, good evening, everyone. Good morning because this is 7 a.m., well, 7:05 now in Connecticut, East Coast of America. Um, First of all, namaskar, pranam, adab to all of you guys. This is both challenging and an emotional moment for me because challenging because this is so early to give a public talk, and emotional because I'm going to use a metaphor my grandfather used to say this in Urdu. वो कहते थे कि दूसरे आपको बुलाएं एज एन आर्टिस्ट ठीक है, लेकिन जब आपको अपने बुलाएं तब आप तरक्की कर रहे हो. So I'm touched, and I am so blessed, and as Adi bhai was saying and Suani was also saying that we go way long back, and um, GMI as an academic body was my first ever teaching job, and I taught there for almost 2 to 3 years, I think, and which was a great learning experience for me, and I am thrilled to be back here virtually. So today's talk will be kind of uh, uh, an ethnomusicological perspective of how Hindustani music has been cultivated over last 150 years, and the role of Sarangi players specifically in that. And what that will lead us to would be a critical view of how in music as a performance practice and music as research uh, tends to raise social issues, tends to raise arguments, tends to raise unresolved questions, and why that is relevant for not only as researchers, music theorists, but us performers in order to grow intellectually, individually as music performers, and also 21st century humanists, human beings. By saying that, I'm thinking of Yo-Yo Ma, one of the greatest cellists of our times, and I really like his quote when he said, when he was growing up and he came out of the conservatory, the first thing he asked himself was, uh, why am I becoming a cellist? Does the world need, or needs rather, another cellist? And then he turned to anthropology, which is a study of human beings. So I would like you guys to keep that thought in your mind, and keep making notes. At any point, if you would like to ask a question, you could either put it in your chat, and your teacher, Swani, could say it to us, or you can raise your hand and speak out aloud by yourself. But there's no pressure to be talking and asking questions. Um, that being said, I'm going to share my presentation, my PPT, and I'm assuming you guys can see it, right? Can you?
Yeah.
Okay, great, fantastic. Okay, so the topic we've selected today, as it was being introduced to you, is called Sarangi Players in Hindustani Music and Ethnomusicological Perspective. So I'd like to begin by just demystifying the term Hindustani music, and why not just North Indian music or Indian classical music, as ubiquitous it's been known and said in use in our colloquial words, and certainly I have grown up with that term as well. So when we say classical music, what does what is the first thing which comes to our mind? What does term classical? Forget about Hindustani, Indian, anything here, but just kind of think about what does the term classical means. And I'm not looking for an academic definition. It could be extremely general. Anyone?
I guess like classical era is always the era where the like things started. For example, like Western classical music is all about like the pieces of the 17th century. I guess like that's where the point where the I would say systematic practices of music started at that time. So we so at now this point of time we call it the classical music. So I guess like when the thing started, it's called the classical period.
Exactly, exactly. Thank you so much for that reflection. So you use two terms, systematization, and when in Western world the music was perceived in order to concertize, in order to present it in a more so-called presentable way. So what happens is when we're using the term classical for Indian music, we're kind of getting under the shadow of how music is perceived in Western world. We are trying to kind of get buried under a lot of burden of, oh, this is how the music should be presented, this is how we should come up with our mannerism, this is how we should sit down, na, 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 na. Although in comparison to a lot of other musical cultures, Indian music, specifically both North and South, are the only two traditions, or one of the few traditions who've kept their pedagogical methodology of transmitting the knowledge and also performance presentation quite rooted to what the culture is. So, for example, if we look at China, for example, if we look at Turkey, for example, if we look at music in the Arab world, they have started using notes. They have started concertizing in a very Western manner, which means you would wear a suit and you sit on a table and a chair, and you present yourself in a very Western notion of how music is perceived when you're presenting it to classes. So classical also is kind of attached to classes here. Okay, so scholars, when they kind of got into Hindustani music in order to research, they problematized the notion of classical for Indian music. Because according to them, Indian music, North Indian music per se, because that's what I'm focusing here, has probably been classicized from the Mughal era, from the time when it became a consumption of the high art. Because before that, as scholarship has told us, music was mainly perceived for devotional purposes, and then it became a consumption of the aristocrats, then it became a high art. So high art means music being used for the purpose of entertainment of a certain class. So I hope this is clear. So that's why I would restrain myself from calling Indian music as classical here, but I would stick to the term Hindustani. And the reason Hindustani is because India was never India until it got colonized. India was a combination, an amalgamation of small little kingdoms. So this particular part of India, which some of the boundaries have been extended into different countries, you already know that Pakistan and Bangladesh were all a unified kingdom of Hindustan, and before that Delhi Sultanate, and so on and so on. So this roughly shaded area came to be recognized as a predominant practitioner of Hindustani music. Yes, later on, hereditary musicians went to the area of Maharashtra and also some parts of Karnataka and Far East, and then Hindustani music got extended, and the practice also got evolved. Now comes my own discipline and my own practice, my own expertise. So I practice an instrument called the Sarangi, which some of you may have known of what it is, and some of you might not, which is okay. Um, just to tell you a little bit about the instrument, the etymology of Sarangi comes to be known as an instrument with 100 colors. Sarangi. Sa means 100, colors mean, rang means color. So, anyone, any wild guesses about why would an instrument be called 100 colors, an instrument with 100 colors? I mean, we're not trying to paint a canvas here, right? So, what do you think metaphorically colors is used here?
Emotions.
Yes. 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 Anything else?
The strings or the notes.
Notes, yes. Notes make. Combination of notes make.
Melody or song.
Melodies, yes. And melodies in North Indian music are identified as
Um, Rag.
rags, yes. Very good. So, emotions to moods to expressions. This is how our music is based on foundationally. And in our music and many different cultures, but specifically the idea of perceiving melodies as colors. And rag by itself, which is a Sanskrit, which comes from a Sanskrit word called ranj, literally means color. So the idea here is to, when you play a rag, it should heighten the state of mind, color the mind, dye the mind of the listener. So that's why scholars have also problematized the paralleling or and also kind of explaining rags as modes or scales. Rags are not modes and scales, because what are modes and scales? What is a mode or a scale? Anyone?
A murchana you get by changing the tonic of a scale.
Yeah, kind of. But Murshana is a different concept, but it is a set of notes where you would just go up and down, right? It has an ascending and a descending. That is what a mode or a scale is. However, rag is more than that, because you have these melodic phrases, these highly structured melodies, which, as I said, are designed to heighten the state of mind. So, for example, if I play a melodic phrase, so this is a phrase, the moment I play that phrase, the connoisseurs or people who have certain knowledge about what rags and how rags work will know what am I doing here in terms of what rag I'm revealing. However, if I just go, yes, this kind of reveals the rag as well, but there are many other rags with the same ascending and descending order, right? So, yes, I am kind of overcomplicating things here, but you will get an idea of what I mean when Sarangi is used metaphorically to explain that how 100 colors are perceived here, 100 moods are perceived here. So, for example, you can play a happy mood. You can play a sad mood. You can play a melancholic mood. And then there are seasons, there are life and death events, and it gets really intense with how the idea of music is perceived in this culture as humanly organized sounds. So sounds which are organized by humans. by human behavior, by societal communal activities, and humanity is a huge part of that. Okay, so I, as a musician myself, I hope that this was clear. If it's not, please raise your hands or put it in the chat, or feel free to unmute yourself and speak. Okay, I'm assuming that a yes. All right. So I come from a long line of musicians. I come from a musician's family, which makes me a hereditary musician, a Khandani musician, a musician whose ancestors for generations have practiced music. Some have become very famous, some did not, but they still kept practicing music. So what does that mean? Well, that means the level of focus, the level of research, the level of evolution of music that happened in the lineage is deep, is kind of thorough. It is also a vast subject in that particular lineage. And what happens is that you grow in the lineage in a musical household, just like how you would, study in a conservatory. Like you are in a conservatory, kind of in a conservatory right now. The only difference for me living in a hereditary conservatory was that I was surrounded by my family members the whole time. And then there were musicians, music practices, discussions about music going on 24/7 literally, which was great and also challenging and daunting at times. There's always a pressure and everyone is trying to outshine everyone. And the other aspect this kind of learning and growing had on me in particular was that music is transmitted or taught almost like an oral language is being passed on to you. You would sit in front of the guru, and I'm sure Ujjwal Bhai, your own teacher here, has learned it the same way. Adi Bhai, when he was learning Indian classical music or Hindustani music from his own teachers, would have done the same way. So the idea is that you sit in front of the teacher with your instrument, teacher you. And the idea is to not learn music as an information being passed on to you, but the idea is to learn music as a lifestyle. The idea is to grasp the vibration, the energy, the so-called sophistication, the so-called mannerism, the so-called ritualistic, spiritual, aesthetical etiquettes music brings in order to make this great musical culture more than just a theoretical practice. And the idea here is that you're not really learning this music to become a performer, but you're learning this music as a lifestyle. You're learning this music to actually work with music, to practice it in many different time segments of the day, many different phases of your life, for many different cultural, communal, beyond performance levels. And even that thought is not random. There is a theory behind it. Someone said emotions. So the idea of emotions, I'm sorry, I'm kind of jumping in and out of the the so-called structure I had, but it's okay. I think we are all okay here. So emotions are theorized in our Indian culture. So Natya Shastra, one of the oldest known music treatises, dramatology, which because it talks more about drama than music, and music is just a small little part of it, theorizes 9 different emotions. And it is these different emotions which are aesthetically so imbibed into our construction of rags, into how songs and song formation from rags got developed later on. And this is a highly detail, analysis, and also practice in musical households, right? So, what happens when you theorize something? What happens when you come something, when you kind of have your ideas written down, when you have a scholarly, peer-reviewed, edited, publishing, monographed out? What happens? Well, it becomes legit. It becomes a highly available and also resourceful document. Okay, and just to draw a parallel, so this happened in India. These emotions got theorized in the 4th and the 5th centuries. It could be before that, because this is the earliest version of Natya Shastra which was found, by the way. We don't know what happened before that, but these emotions were also theorized in Europe in the 14th century, 15th century, I'm sorry, by the philosopher called René Descartes, although he theorized only 6 basic emotions, and that's how the later on opera got evolved, and the idea of song analysis and song practice and song construction in opera was understood, and his taxonomy, The Passions of the Soul, talks quite in detail about these emotions. So who knows if Descartes was inspired or knew about Natya Shastra then? We don't know. But what I'm trying to do is trying to draw parallels, and also trying to show you that, these things have not been just indigenously available to one particular music culture. They've been going on, and the idea is that cultures have been probably interacting and learning from each other. Okay, so coming back to the idea of Guru Shishya Parampara, which is Guru is the teacher, Shishya is the student, Parampara is the tradition, an ancient Indian method or methodology of knowledge transmission. Here, there is another theory which scholars are currently theoretizing, although it was mentioned in one of the articles by ethnomusicologist Regula Qureshi, that when a student sits in front of the master, there is a concept of Sina Basina Talim, which has also been used in Sufism, which has also been used in Nathpanthi yoga pedagogical methodologies. So you sit in front of the Guru with your Sina is your chest, Basina is facing your Guru, is learning. And this is where spirituality comes into the picture. So you're not really, as I said, you're not grasping information, but you are turning information into knowledge, and knowledge into enforcement of music becoming affective with an A. So affect is different from effect. What happens is, when music starts to have its effect on the listener and onto the performer, it becomes affect with an A. And affect loosely is translated or narrated as an expressivity where music moves beyond our hearts and minds to a level where we get into a state of trance. So it really moves our mind and soul beyond our imagination. So what happens in Sina Basina Talim is, depending on who your guru is, what discipline you're working with, what kind of knowledge, what style, what school you're coming from, and what the schedule your teacher has, you would wake up, and your guru probably would finish their morning prayers, rituals, and then they'll either tune their tanpura or any other instrument, and then they'll sit down, and depending on their mood, because moods are very important in our Indian music, right? The idea is to get into a mood, get people into a mood, get yourself into a mood, think what you are in the mood, and the idea here is to draw inspiration from your own surroundings, right? So whatever the mood they are in, and depending on what time segment of the day, they'll choose a rag, and the guru would start singing or playing. Ere mai aaj bandha vora, ere mai aaj बांधा वोरा साजन अतियन धन सन बाजिलो मोरे मदारी माई आज बांधा वोरा. So this is how, and by the way, I'm just mimicking. I mean, obviously the guru would sound much better than I am. And then you're expected to come up with a mimesis or like copy what guru is doing. So, you notice that when I was singing, I sang a tan, a run, a melismatic, oscillatory combination of notes. But because depending on what level the student is, sometimes the student would not be able to do it. That's where the discourse would open. And then you would start, learning from the guru techniques, theoretical aspects of how this melisma would happen. You would work on stages before in order to work on that melisma. You would also work on the etiquettes in order to sing or play that melisma. You would also talk about tuning. You would talk about esoteric exercises in order to achieve that melismatic concepts here. So there, I mean, I'm just kind of saying things from the tip of my head right now. I mean, even just that small little melisma would open a Pandora's box, and the discourse, the lesson would go for weeks, would go for months, and I'm sure Ujjwal Bhai would agree with me. And the idea would be not to just notate the composition or the bandish, which is the terminology used for songs in North Indian music, but actually learn it by heart, play and practice it so much that it starts to have its effect on you first, and then when you sing or play it to the listener, you're not really thinking about the technical aspect, but you've kind of imbibed it in a way that it becomes a part of your own body and a part of your own lifestyle, part of your own culture, your daily routine, your daily habits. And that's when music as a lifestyle becomes very interesting. And then, as I said, there are aspects of tuning, resonance. Suvani was telling me you guys were learning about resonance in your previous class. So resonance plays a very important part, especially for Sarangi players. And there are theorists who've tried to research the concept of resonance in Indian music, especially because we use sympathetic strings, which yes, was used in Western early music instruments as well, but the way Indians exploited it and kind of made it available for so many instruments that the acoustomology of how the idea is it's perceived with sound is at par excellence, really, and still people are trying to research and theorize here. So that is a little bit of my own background and how music practice is worked in the concept of trying to recognize yourself or identify as hereditary musician. Do you guys have any questions up till now? Any thoughts, any reflections, something which stood out for you, something which did not, or something which you would like to add? Okay. Well,
sorry.
Yeah.
Suhail, kya baat hai? I particularly don't have any question. I thought there should be another voice, to tell you how good it is going, and it's wonderful, bhai. Kya baat hai? I think it's a great benefit to all the students. And please, guys, feel free to ask anything because, I think the more interactive it is, everybody will enjoy it. And, And I think one of the questions I was going to ask कि जैसे आपने sympathetic strings का आपने कहा था सोहेल, so sympathetic strings आप थोड़ा इनको explain कर सकते हैं क्या कि राग के अनुसार how does sympathetic strings play a role while you are tuning for a rag or playing your music? Just like briefly, I'm not sure whether it really concerns your topic, but how does it play a role in with comparison to like similar the concept of sympathetic strings and probably the Western instruments if there is. So yeah.
No, Joel, thank you so much for the reflection and question as well. I think it definitely does make sense and is relevant to all of us. I've just stopped sharing my screen for that matter so that you can see my instrument, clearly. So, I don't know how clearly you can see Sarangi as an instrument it's quite complicated looking. It has about 35 to 40 sympathetic strings, and you have 3 main strings on which you do the main playing. When I say the main playing, I mean that's where you're striking the bow on and also sliding your fingers, not underneath the strings or on top, but kind of on the side. Another aspect which makes this instrument sound unique and peculiar as well is that unlike other instruments such as violin, cello, sarod, sitar, and so on, where you use your fingertips to press down on the strings in order to play a note. You're using your knuckles here, or as they're called, cuticles in English. And the idea is to slide the note, and what that does is it makes the notion or the idea of exploring microtones or the shrutis, which are heavily used in our music, comparatively easier, but also a menace and a challenge for Sarangi players to control intonation. So if I were to give you an example, sa re ga ma da ni sa is one way of singing this scale, rag, todi, Gujri todi. And another way would be how Indian musicians would play or sing. It would be sa re ga ma da ni sa sa ni da ma re ga re sa. So this kind of changes the application or the approach of playing music in relation to how Western classical music is perceived, and the definition of being perfect or kind of trying to present a perfect note changes. The perception changes. Because here the idea is not to sa re ga ma da ni sa ni da ma ga re ga re sa re ga da, which is, yes, the idea is to kind of straight, hit the note straight and be precise. The precision is according to that understanding is different because you have the role of harmony in Western music. However, here the concept of harmony is also different, and also there is a absence of harmony because this music is monophonic, which means the idea is that you kind of enhance and dig the melody in a much deeper form. So you develop the melody in a way that harmony is caused due to the melodic interaction a phrase is having. All right. Sorry. And then how sympathetic strings play a vital role here is, and there is a vast study of architecture and sound playing a vital role. So think of India in the medieval era. You have these massive dome-shaped buildings, space, no sound pollution, no honking of cars, no air pollution. Everything is much calmer in Delhi, and the idea is that you would sit in front of an aristocrat or a king, Raja, Nawab, or anything. And in those particular architectural settings, there is no amplification, no artificial electronic amplification, that you would be expected to play music. So what Indians did was they worked with architecture and their understanding of what was going on in that era, and they came up with a concept of natural amplification, a concept of having effects imbibed into the sound of the instruments, the concept of having reverb, the concept of having sustain, the concept of having manual delay in the instrument by itself. So to give you an enhance on that, what I'll do is I'm going to mute as much as I can my sympathetic strings and play just to give you an example, and then we'll discuss that what we think was the difference, what difference did we notice. Okay, all right, so I've inserted a cloth, and now significant part of my sympathetic strings are muted here, so notice the sound. Okay, now I'm unmuting them, the cloth is out. Still going here. Now it stopped. What do you think? What was the contrast? What was happening when I muted these strings? What did it sound like to you?
Anyone who'd like to chime in?
Yeah, and see, we are not looking for academic definitions here,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
don't feel shy. Just say anything, whatever you notice. I'm curious to know.
It sounded a lot when you had your strings muted. It sounded thinner, and a lot of the reverb was missing from when you unmuted the strings. The sound was a lot richer when you unmuted your strings compared to when you'd muted them.
Yeah, it became voluminous. And you know that changes. I mean, right now what you are listening is just a fraction of how in-person Sarangi sound or any acoustic instrument sound, for example, Tanpura or Sarod or Sitar or Swarandal or Tabla even, is experienced. And these instruments are designed to interact, to adapt, to work cohesively with the environment they're kind of being set it up in. So if I were to play Sarangi outside in an open air setting, it will sound totally different. I mean, it won't sound like a cello, but the acoustics, the fine details of how tone works changes. And there is also a scientific study that how these sympathetic strings kind of work with wind, which carries this sound for miles and miles and miles and miles. So, you know, there are many different folk versions of the Sarangi. So Sarangi is also found widely in the state of Rajasthan, where you have a. So what you're seeing right now here is a contemporary version of the Sarangi, which was developed probably in the early 17th century. So this particular version is not 1,000 years old, by the way. So any Sarangi player who says, "Oh, this is a 1,000-year-old Sarangi," they have to check their artifact, because Sarangi, yes, is very old. It's been mentioned in treatises which were written in the 9th century, Sangeet Ratnakara, Sangeet Darpana, Brihadesi, and it's been mentioned as Pinakini Veena, you know. But this wasn't the shape of the instrument at that point of time. The shape was different, the size was different, the strings were different as well. So that kind of gives us an idea that Sarangi as an instrument has evolved over a period of time. And it was only in the late 17th, mid 17th century, around when the term Sarangi was enforced into practice from the slang Sarangi. So Yeah, so for example, in Rajasthan, you would have these camel riders, these folk caravan travelers. They used to communicate by playing Sarangi melodies. Uh, So one caravan would know, okay, you're playing that melody, so that could be that caravan which is coming from there. And the wind would carry that sound. Wind would carry that sound, and obviously these are open spaces. You're not talking about concrete jungles of New Delhi. Open spaces where the sound would get carried about. Okay. So I hope, Ujjwal bhai, I was able to explain how the sympathetic strings work here. All right. Okay. Great.
Thank you.
I'm going to. No, thank you for asking that question. I'm going to reshare my presentation again. I know Ashish bhai has asked me a question. I'll get back to it. I can't read it right now. I'll ask Suvani to read it for me because my screen is so far ahead. It's almost becoming difficult for me to read. Okay, another thing about hereditary, and we'll come back to that question, Suvani. Let me just finish this bit and then we'll come back to that question. So another thing which is quite characteristic about hereditary lineages that children from a very young age are initiated into this art form. They're not enforced. It depends on if they want to. In certain cases, for example, I was never forced to pick up Sarangi. In fact, for a significant amount of time, when I expressed a desire to learn the instrument, my grandfather denied it, and maybe he was checking if I had actually got the interest, or I was just like a child. Oh, I want to learn the harmonium, the tabla, because these are the instruments, in a musical household you grow up with and end up playing. So children are initiated from a very young age and to become performers, So performance is an integral part. So yes, you are learning music as a lifestyle, but the idea of impact, the idea of mannerism, the etiquettes of no, this is how a performer should get to stage and communicate and also behave in front of the audience and to their fellow artists is kind of very important to the culture here. This is a historic photo where you see the great Shujat Khan sitting with his son. Here is Shujat Khan Sahab, that's Nishad Khan Sahab, that's Wajahat. These are Shujat Bhai's cousins and Imrat Khan Sahab's sons here. A historic picture which was captured by ethnomusicologist Dan Newman. We'll talk about it in a bit later. And I also learned the same way. I kind of started picking up songs, and that's how my vocal training got started. And at the age of 7, my grandfather tied the sacred thread on my right arm in a formal initiation ceremony or discipleship ceremony where he kind of accepted me as his pupil, as a student, and that kind of changed the relationships we had of an ordinary grandfather or a grandson relationship. And it changes a lot of social and communal aspect as well. When you're kind of given that apprenticeship, when you're kind of included in that apprenticeship, you suddenly are exposed to a different lifestyle altogether. I don't have time to go into detail right now, but I feel blessed that I was the chosen one. So a lot of time people ask me, why did you choose the Sarangi, and I come up with the question, answer saying that instead of me choosing the Sarangi chose me. So that's how hereditary musical lines work, and the music happens here. Now I'm going to talk about my own research and my own academic work in the discipline of ethnomusicology as a field. But before that, I want to kind of draw back a little bit on why ethnomusicology, why my community and why specifically Sarangi players in ethnomusicology and what is the relationship there is. But before we do that, Ashish had a question. Suvani, what was the question?
Yeah, Ashish, could you actually just say it out? Because I don't see it in the chat. I only see Bharat's question in the chat.
I didn't actually ask a question, so I was also confused.
Oh,
Ah,
I'm
okay,
sorry.
okay.
I'm
It was
sorry.
probably one of
Yeah,
the
I just
emojis.
okay. What
Yeah.
happened was that I saw Ashish's name and then I saw a chat
Okay. So there's a
being
question from
updated.
Bharat in the chat,
Okay.
and he asks, could you please throw some light on how Sarangi is different from Dilruba?
Okay. Well, Dilruba Bharat is a cross between sitar and sarangi, which means Dilruba has frets, and it's basically a bowed sitar, an upright bowed sitar. Um, and Sarangi is fretless and it has many more sympathetic strings, probably the most in the sympathetic strings categorical instruments, and uh, as I said, the most different characteristic is you kind of strike the notes with your nails, and Dilruba is used to play with fingertips. Yeah. Okay, so let's move on to the field of ethnomusicology. Do we know about ethnomusicology or musicology in general? Any thoughts, or what could it be? I mean, even if you're seeing the term in front of you for this first time, what ideas could it invoke in your heads? I'm just curious to know. That will also give me a break from rambling. Ethnomusicology. Ethnomusicology. Take a moment. Think.
Any guesses?
What is musicology? Sorry.
Yeah, I don't know if this fits in with the perspective you're going to share, but what comes to my mind with ethnomusicology is especially the often Eurocentric and sometimes racist aspects, how a lot of white scholars and European scholars think of musicology as the study of Western classical music and ethnomusicology as the study of any other music which is considered ethnic music. So I don't know if that adds
No,
to your.
well, you've hit the nail on its head. But yeah, that's a very beautiful elaboration, a very academic understanding and definition of what ethnomusicology is. Thank you so much. Anyone else? Generally speaking, people who have heard. What is musicology?
Do you guys want to try and break it down? So musicology, music,
Yeah, let's break it
logy.
down.
Yeah.
Yeah, see, I can sit here and keep grilling their heads with academic jargonful definitions, but I really want to challenge their intellect and critical thinking. Sorry, guys.
So like musicology, we can say that it's a study of music by saying music and logy and bringing them together. So it's kind
Yeah.
of a study of music.
Yeah, so in a way, it involves music analysis. You're kind of getting into the nitty gritty of okay, how music is working, techniques. You're coming up with transcription, charting things out, right?
Right.
Right? Good, good. And then if you add the term ethno, where do you think ethnic, ethnicity?
Ethnic music, the study of ethnic music.
Yeah, and what is ethnic means? Ethnicity means. What could that mean?
This is the part like I'm not sure, like by ethnic I mean like something that are like coming from our ancestors.
Yes, indigeneity, indigenous, right? That's what ethnicities are. Ethnicities are kind of explained or understood as these here we are talking specifically from the point of view of music, which have kind of developed, archived, conserved their own culture for centuries. So ethnomusicology, as someone very beautifully elaborated, is the study of non-Western musical cultures. It is a study which learns music from the point of view of not just music analysis, but understanding music from the social behaviors of human beings. So in the earlier section of the talk, I used a term music as humanly organized sounds, right? And we understand that music is mainly what we understand music, and we've been researching is humanly organized sound, although now ethnomusicology has broadened itself to a lot of sounds animals make, and environmental sounds are also included in ethnomusicology, which is a new thought and certainly not my area of expertise and also part of my research. But when the study got into practice and into research, the idea of researching was to work with non-Western ethnicities, and basically it was started by anthropologists, these cultural anthropologists, and anthropology is a study of human beings anyway, human cultures. So these early cultural anthropologists were song collectors, and they were mainly working with folk musicians from America, and they were sometimes native indigenous folk musicians and lineages they were working with. So for example, in this particular book by well-known ethnomusicologist Ruth Stone, and on the cover you can see that she's recording a Native American singer or a musician. And then over the time, the field kept getting expanded, and this is, I'm talking about mid 20th century, yeah. So it's a post-world phenomena which happened in America to problematize the Western understanding of music as a musical culture, and also to show a parallel and problematize the concept of center and periphery, and decentralize Eurocentric ideas, to show that there are different musical cultures who have existed over a period of time and also have a music history, music theory, and a social cultural demographic of it as well. So I'm kind of jumping the boat from that to coming directly to Hindustani music, that musicologists entered in Hindustani music, and when they entered, why they were interested in hereditary musicians. In hereditary musicians who, for, as I said, lineages have been music practitioners. These khandans, these gharanas, these music schools of hereditary music practices. And we know India, is for the still and for over centuries is a caste-based, caste-divided society, right? So every caste has a specialization. You have carpenters, you have artisans, you have warriors, you have yogis, you have priests, you have musicians, so entertainers. So for centuries, you had these hereditary musicians, a caste of entertainers who have been practicing music, and they became specialists into what they were doing, and they were later on hired by courts. They were patronized, and they were under patronage, and patronage is something which was also happening in Europe, by the way. Handel was patronized, Bach was patronized. Actually, Bach wasn't. Bach was working at a conservatory. Mozart was patronized, So coming back to India, so when ethnomusicologists entered into the field of North Indian Hindustani music, they found out that there is a significant amount of scholarship which is talking about music, music theory, and so much of historical artifacts about philosophy and religion related to music. But there was nothing about musicians. There was no mention of women. There was no mention of hereditary musicians who were later stigmatized, marginalized, discriminated due to the communal reasons and also other discriminatory reasons going on in India. So these ethnomusicologists, when they entered the field, they started raising issues related to that. And Sarangi players are extremely crucial to this thought, because Sarangi players, when they entered the field, or when Sarangi was getting evolved, let's say, in the beginning, Sarangi was not, unlike Veena or other high art instruments, was not the instrument which would be practiced into the court. It was an instrument of a rural demographic music practice. It was used by saints, by Sufis, by yogis, by these non-religious hierarchical religious practitioners. So, for example, in this particular 16th century Mughal painting, you are seeing a dervish who is accompanied by a dancing Sarangi player, who happens to get the dervish into a state of trance, wajad, getting into a musical ecstasy in order to get into a higher state of mind. And Sarangi was used for a very long period of time for these particular reasons. So that's why probably a lot of musical theorists did not even mention in treatises this instrument, because they thought, oh, maybe this is not important enough. But it was still around. It was kind of being used into the demographic. Okay, and then in the 16th century, Hindustani music was kind of in a state of transition. So it was transitioning from one musical form into another. So for example, it was getting out of the Dhrupad form into Khayal music. And this is when women singers and performers and entertainers were encouraged to perform into the courts. And these women singers and performers, who were later came to be identified by Western scholars and Oriental writers as courtesans, which is also a problematic term because they were not called as courtesans in that era. These entertainers were highly respected, and they were like the pop stars of that era. And they loved the Sarangi tone for their accompaniment. That's why Sarangi is also used as, or has been used prominently for vocal accompaniment. So these courtesans brought Sarangi players into the courts. So suddenly, from the rural aspect of how Sarangi was practiced, it suddenly has gotten into high art. It's become an instrument of court music, and became so popular that there were two Sarangi accompanying vocalists, and that would, you can only imagine the effect, the acoustic vibrational effect it would give into the performance. And everything was going fine, people were happy. And then 1857 came, when India was being colonized, or in the process, the British started stigmatizing courtesans. And I am kind of simplifying and cutting the long story short here. One of the main reasons for stigmatizing courtesans were because these courtesans were played a vital role in the first 1857 uprising in India. These courtesans were educated. They knew about history. They knew about Kama Sutra. They knew about politics, And we often think Kama Sutra is all about lovemaking. There's politics being discussed in Kama Sutra. There are scientific methodologies of how yoga should be perceived, And that was a time when sutra, the fabrication of thoughts, the fabrication of ideas, were evolved and being practiced into India in our daily lives. So India as a society was quite progressive and ahead of their time. However, these colonialists came with their colonialist ideas, and they were also trying to impose hegemonic Christianic ideas into the Indian society in order to take the power. So they saw courtesans as a problem, because they had contacts with the aristocrats. They were all the high nobles, kings and and their relatives were hanging out with these courtesans, and they were influencing politically their minds. And this has been proved by anthropologists. So I'm not just saying this out of my head. There is a fantastic article by anthropologist Weena Oldenburg, which was written in the 90s, which problematizes the notion, the understanding, and also the history, which has been perceived about courtesans. You know, the whole idea of, oh, the girls were kidnapped and then they were trapped into this and that, and they were sex workers. All of that has been problematized. Write it down, Weena Oldenburg, and if you have time, read this article. And you know, it comes to know that a lot of these women were being entertainers out of choice. You know, it's as I said, they were like pop stars. We see pop stars now doing everything they can into music videos. Do we call them sex workers? Probably not. They were almost the same, and some of them were paid such a handsome salary that they were the highest tax payees in the society. Gohar Jan, one of the most celebrated and also the first woman to have recorded LPs in that era, had the same buggy as the Viceroy of Calcutta in those days. So you can imagine the wealth and the influence, and also their social power dynamics they were working with. Okay, so when courtesans got stigmatized, everything related to them got stigmatized. When I'm saying everything, literally everything, the kind of songs they used to sing, the mannerism. And this is the time when India was kind of going back, where you kind of suddenly is trying to sacralize everything. You're trying to align ideas with, oh no, we have to make everything pure. You know, the ideas of nationalism, the idea of religious hierarchy are again being imposed, and the ideas of, as I said, purifying and sacralizing music are being enforced. So what happens when everything attached to them gets stigmatized, marginalized? Obviously the musicians, Sarangi players especially, who were sometimes their accomplices and sometimes also their teachers, they became their teachers, also became stigmatized. So once after becoming so popular, this instrument, this practice, Sarangi lineages were marginalized so much that a point came when some of the biggest stars in Hindustani music, whose music has kind of spread like ripples in the pond so much that none Hindustani music even today cannot have been influenced by them or cannot explore their music, because their music is used as model. They were all from Sarangi lineages or Sarangi players themselves. For example, Bade Ghulam Ali Khan, he was a Sarangi player himself. Amir Khan was a Sarangi player, and he trained Sarangi players himself. Munir Khan, his own student, was a phenomenal vocalist and a Sarangi player. Ahmad Jan Thirakwa, he comes from a Sarangi line whose house happened to practice Sarangi himself. But what happened? Because of the stigma, because of the problematized notion and understanding of Sarangi and Sarangi lineages, because of its attachment to courtesan culture, these superstars of Hindustani music started disassociating themselves from Sarangi lines. They started living an obscure life. They started denying the fact, oh no, well, we are different, we are not Sarangi players. And that we see that happening, you know. That has been going on in India for a very long time. Sociologist Max Weber, when he studied 1880 census of Hindu population and why the Hindu population was being degenerated in India, he comes to an analysis that the moving out and disassociation and change of caste, change of religion was common in India, because the lower strata or you know, the so-called stigmatized caste had no room to grow. So that's the same thing these musicians started doing as well. And that was an utmost interesting thing for ethnomusicologists, and probably that's why they didn't start working with these, you know, these epitome court musicians at that time, who were kind of dominating the demographic of what Hindustani music came to be identified. They were more interested on, oh, where is this coming from? Why is this coming from? So there is an aspect of sociology in ethnomusicology. There is an aspect of genealogy. you're studying genealogy. There is aspect of philosophy as well. So all these streams, all these sub-disciplines mix together and kind of form this one, melting pot of a discipline called ethnomusicology, which now ethnomusicologists have argued has kind of moved a step ahead of these disciplines, because you have so much of independence in order to research, in order to say and use your voice to talk about music. I mean, you're welcome to use genealogy, you're welcome to use philosophical, religious ideas, obviously musicological ideas, sociological ideas, and anthropological ideas as well. So I know this can be jarring and this can be extremely daunting, but are we clear at this point that why and how ethnomusicology is kind of was crucial for Hindustani music to be researched? And one thing before I get into a discussion, when ethnomusicologists entered the field, the musicologists of North Indian music at that time criticized ethnomusicologists and said that why are you researching our high art? Our art, which has been so heavily researched on, has a history and court music and this and that. We Indians, we have this notion of that whatever we do is the best, everything is crap, right? So we were coming up with that idea. I mean, whatever we do is fantastic. It's kind of it's amazing. It's so deeply researched and evolved that there is nothing like that in the world. However, there are other cultures who have evolved as well. There have been ideas and notions of same scientific methodologies, mathematical ideas, which has been researched in other musical cultures. Anyway, that was oh God, am I getting a call? Sorry, I'm going to decline this. Yeah, so when ethnomusicologists entered the field, the musicologists criticized them and said, well, why are you researching our high art into a discipline which kind of, until then was only researching indigenous Native Americans or tribes of Northern Africa, and stuff like that. India has such a huge written historical record. So at a point, their question was not wrong, but it wasn't aware and it wasn't politically correct. So I really like the ethnomusicologist's answer to that was, they said, well, the reason why we're researching Hindustani music is because there is no research of musicians. You're not talking about musicians at all. It's all about musicology. You're talking about techniques. You're talking about theories. You're not talking about religion. You're not talking about the marginalized status of musicians involved and where it is coming from and the other social issues it raises. So that makes this particular field and the understanding of Hindustani music extremely crucial, at least definitely at this point where we're seeing India is, at a vulnerable, point. There are so many ideas of okay, let's sacralize, make things pure, go back to where we're coming from without having a faint idea of where we're coming from. It's kind of, history is all about perspective, and that's why I kind of title this particular talk that I'm presenting a perspective here. And you're more than welcome to challenge what I'm saying, but this is what ethnomusicology speaks about. And the kind of ethnomusicologists I've been working with are probably one of the best in the fields right now. So in 1969, an ethnomusicologist called Dan Newman came to India and started working with my grandfather. And then he not recently actually, it's been more than 10 years, he retired as a vice chancellor of UCLA. And he's just one example I'm giving you. There are other ethnomusicologists who went to different Sarangi places. For example, Ubor went to Pandit Ram Narayan. Nicholas McGrill was working with Abdul Latif Khan. So there was like a group of ethnomusicologists who got into India and started working with Sarangi players. So suddenly there was a spotlight on Sarangi players only into the field of ethnomusicology, because until now no one is talking about Sarangi. Sarangi in 1970s and 80s and also in 90s almost became like an endangered instrument, an instrument which became so rare that the government has to come up with scholarships and plans in order to kind of attract more students and interest into the field. So he came, and Dan Newman came and started working with my grandfather, and came up with a book called The Life of Music in North India, which is this book, which has become almost like a Bible for South Asianists and also students and researchers of Hindustani music. It is kind of a critical inquiry from a demographic of cultural anthropology and also ethnomusicology as well. So he worked very closely onto the community of my musicians I belong to, and then another ethnomusicologist who came was Regula Qureshi, a Canadian-based ethnomusicologist who was married to someone, a Nawab, not a Nawab, but someone who was related to the Nawab in Lucknow. And they wrote several books. They kind of came up with several analogies, and they were also studying me, my own trajectory, and how I, as a hereditary musician, was crossing boundaries. So the reason I'm saying that is that, yes, although it kind of appears to be a coincidence or kind of a matter of chance that I stumbled upon into the field and I started researching, to that I would say that it is not a coincidence. It is not by chance as well. I was attached to the field of ethnomusicology even before I was born. My community was already being researched upon. And in a way, these ethnomusicologists initiated me into the field in order to have my own say, my own critical review, my own critical inquiry of what's being said. So ethnomusicology now has come to a point where the concept of let's decolonize the discipline. Decolonize the discipline is extremely important here. What could we mean by decolonizing a discipline, or just the concept of decolonizing? Anyone? What does colonization mean? Let's break it down.
To kind of identify and to kind of identify and separate the colonial influence on our music and and keep it authentic.
So that is decolonization, right? Yeah? Sorry, I can't see
Yeah.
you. Maybe because I'm not like on the gallery mode. Okay, so if you've nodded. Okay, yeah, great. Yes. So authenticate, maybe not, because what ethnomusicologists do is they make sure that they work on authenticity. That's what scholarly research is all about, that you have to work with authenticity. And how does authenticity comes? When you do when you work with a particular musical culture who's been working as one of the lenient one of the leading musical lineages into the field. And the idea is participant observation, which is the key to how ethnomusicology works and also comes to known as ethnography, is very important here. So yeah, authentic. Yeah, you have to keep it authentic. If it's not authentic, it's not research. But when you're decolonizing, you're actually initiating an insider who will kind of problematizes, because that's what scholars do. They kind of give everything a critical view and find problems, and not for the sake of finding problems, but in order to challenge and also reflect upon what's already been said, for the scholarship to grow, which is a crucial practice. So these insiders give their own views on that. And this concept of let's initiate insiders has been going on for a while, especially in the university I am in, which is called Wesleyan University. So Western University has one of the most well-known South Asian program, and I'm not the only insider who was initiated into the ethnomusicological program here. In the 1970s, L. Shankar, being a hereditary Carnatic musician, was in the same program. T. Vishwa, a great music practitioner from Devadasi tradition. They're like the hereditary music specialists of South India Carnatic music, was initiated and wrote a very important dissertation on social issues and how the Devadasi tradition was marginalized and problematized by the upper class Carnatic musicians in South India. So Wesleyan has been doing that for a while. What I am doing as far as my research is concerned, as you must have figured out, and I'm focusing on Sarangi players. I am raising issues related to courtesans, which is not new. I mean, ethnomusicologists have been talking about courtesans. Ethnomusicologists have also been talking about Sarangi players. But I am giving an insider's knowledge which would not be accessed by ethnomusicologists until an insider talks about it. So why I kind of showed you all these examples and also talked about my own trajectory up till now was to show that yes, music as a practice, in order to grow at a point, also needs scholarly approach. And this is not a new phenomenon. I mean, this didn't happen due to ethnomusicology. I mean, the great Tansen, wrote in one of the Sahasras this book on Drupad songs, which was written and found from the excavations of the 16th century historical artifacts, said the art of music is infinite yet incomplete. A learner should carefully understand its rules concerning rhythm, should always remember God. So spirituality is very important here. Then he goes on to say, first he should master the 7 notes, because this is the backbone of music. Then he should study the Saptadhyay, the Swaradhyay, Ragadhyay, Taladhyay, and Prabandhyadhyay, and so on. So he's kind of talking about the understanding, the research, analysis of swars, rhythm, compositions, dance, in musical instruments. These are important, and this doesn't come from just sitting down and practicing your instrument or your voice. Yes, that is important, but there is, in order to grow, you have to have a certain kind of a scholarly discourse, because especially in Hindustani music, so much scholarly has been written. I mean, the concept of dividing rags to different segments of the day is not random. There's a Greek theory behind it. And the theory goes on to say, like, the Pythagoras and Pythagoreans came up with this concept of that if you divide certain notes to different time segments of the day, they would resonate with the cosmoses, creating a cosmological harmony. And how does that happen? But Pythagoras has this theory that every celestial body in the cosmos has a ring which is constantly ringing, but we as mortals cannot hear it. We don't have the ability. However, because Pythagoras was also a great mathematician, he came up with a concept of Pythagorean tuning system. So if you tune your instrument to that ratio, you will start resonating. So resonance is very important here. You'll start resonating your instrument, your music practice to the cosmos, which eventually will create a much better and a larger and a stronger affect with an A. So you will start having like miraculous effects of what you're doing musically. So often we think, oh, these legends like, oh, Tansen sang Rag Deepak and there was fire are random. Maybe they're not random, they are written in the documents. And the point is that if those miracles happened or not is not the point. The point is that they were important, and these stories have been notated and passed on in several historical artifacts. And there is, and it's not a superstitious belief. I mean, there are these scientific ideas going on which would create that effect. There are other stories which talks about how the great grandson of Tansen was singing in Shah Jahan's court, and he was singing the Rag Todi, and the Rag Todi would present itself and start dancing around, in front of the court, musicians, performers, and also court members, and also the king. Again, the point is not whether it happened or not, but the point is that these stories were written down, and then historians have researched upon it. So that is science. Then there are mathematical calculations, which are not only limited to rhythm, by the way, in melodies also. So there is a concept called prastara or swara prastara, which colloquially is used as Meru Khand. These are these algorithmic exercises which help musicians to develop and enhance their improvisatory skills. And improvisation is very important in Hindustani music, by the way. And these are esoteric knowledge exercises which were passed on to lineages from generation to generation. And this particular one was mentioned in the 13th century music treatises written by Sarangi, who wrote Sangeeta Ratanakara. And I was taught this without even knowing that this was coming from a treatise. I mean, that happened at later stage, and I'm sure Ujjwal Bhai knows these exercises. So the reason why I'm pointing this out, that there is theory. There are these esoteric, scientific, mathematical concepts and ideas which are used in knowledge transmission at the hereditary level, and which also makes crucial for musicians to have some kind of a scholarly interest in order to grow and have an idea where you're coming from. So with that being said, I'll end there now, because I can just keep going on and rambling about things. But I'm curious to know your thoughts. I'm curious to know what you think, and I'm curious to answer certain questions and take the lecture to the next level. Oh, well, Q&A of the lecture to the next level. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you so much, Suhail. This has been incredibly captivating, mesmerizing, it's actually a lecture performance that happened. So I think the floor is open for questions. I have a bunch of them as well, but let's hear from everybody else here first.
I have a thought or a question. I'm not sure what it is, but I don't know. I'm not sure if I followed you correctly, or maybe I missed something. But when you were talking about just the history of the Sarangi and Sarangi players, at a certain point in history, the Sarangi began to be introduced into the darbars of kings, and the Sarangi players started to gain a lot of recognition, and they were well respected, and they were doing very well, like earning money and everything. And then the British came and colonized us, at which point this profession of the courtesans to get like stabilized, and the comparisons were drawn with sex workers, and so basically that happened, where the courtesan was starting to get stigmatized, and people started to Sarangi players started to disassociate with their instrument. And after that, the ethno-music colleges came also from the West, and they're saying that you're not documenting your musicians, and there are social issues with that. No, I'm just like I'm thinking that are they not just complaining about an issue that they created, or because before the British came, weren't like Sarangi players and just were they not very well respected and doing very well, and then we were colonized and things changed, and the things and that I don't know if I've
No. Your question is very good, Pratyush. Pratyush, right? Am I saying your name?
yeah.
Yeah. No, no, thank you so much for that question. I really appreciate it. I know it's a lot of information. I mean, what I just said is my life words of research and understanding. So it's just extremely difficult to kind of break it down in and also make it accessible to people who probably don't really have that deep of a historical context of where this knowledge has come from. So, okay. So you're asking me two questions. One is that when ethnomusicologists came, uh, they started researching what is happening with Sarangi players, right? And then your other question uh, is it because of ethnomusicologists or kind of white people this started happening? Is that what you're trying to say?
Kind of like, I mean, this thought just came to my head, like when you were talking about how the Indian scholars maybe were like, why are you, when they asked the ethnomusicologists, like, why are you studying our music?
Yeah,
There's been long historical documentation of it,
yeah,
and
yeah,
so why are you
yeah,
studying us? And to which the ethnomusicologist responded that there's no
yeah,
documentation of your musicians, and there are social issues involved
yeah,
with that. And so,
yeah.
so this kind of, I just,
Yeah, no, I kind of understand what you're trying to say, and you're also trying to be politically correct. That's completely fine. See, I think I might have did not make it clear. So ethnomusicology is America is home to ethnomusicology. It was formed in America, not Europe. It was a post-world phenomena that happened in America to show European-centric ideas of research in music, especially. Okay, so keep that in mind. So these are Americans who are coming to India. They're not Europeans. Europeans are already researching. They were Orientalists, right? Orientalist is a term which is now problematized, but was used heavily when European historians, researchers came and started researching us, and they were researching us with their own ideas and stuff, and even that has been problematized by ethnomusicologists. So what ethnomusicologists were doing were they were actually raising our awareness. They were kind of trying to show is that what colonialism has done to us, because what we do is we are so busy kind of caught up in our communal um, discriminatory behaviors within each other that we don't really realize that what colonialism did to us, you know, at the depth of cultural demographic as well, not just creating boundaries within our country, right? So that's what they were making us realize. So because we didn't, even musicians, even hereditary musicians didn't have any awareness of colonialism. You know, it was not just the upper middle class. Upper middle class, yes, did, but musicians were totally unaware and what it was doing to music at an extent where we almost lost the musical approach of courtesans. That music pedagogical ideas and performance ideas are completely lost now. You know, it's a huge a lag and a gap in our music practice now. Sarangi as well. You know, Sarangi makers are no more because the best Sarangi makers at the time, at the height when they were kind of making Sarangis, and which is such a difficult task, you know, to carve this instrument out. And when they wanted to sell it, there were no Sarangi buyers because there was no business for Sarangi players. You know what they were doing with the Sarangis? Their stories when they were burning Sarangis to make food. That these stories, and then the best Sarangis now are hanging out in upper middle class European houses, in Western houses, because they were Sarangi players and Sarangi lineages were busy moving on to different instruments or becoming vocalists because there was no work for Sarangi players. So what these ethnomusicologists came, they gave us a view which is an outsider view. Sometimes it's different when you're inside a musical cultural system. So they made us realize about the social issues which we were not seeing. I'm oversimplifying this concept, and also, you know, the stigma, the marginalization, obscurity, how the field got evolved and musicologists came. It didn't happen overnight. I mean, there's a process, and a lot has happened before and after around that time too. So I hope I answered your question. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Mm-hmm.
And just to sort of add to that, and Suhail, just also feel free to kind of expand upon it. I think a part of the complication is also the fact that other than the colonial violence, there is also like a kind of violence which is intrinsic to there's also a kind of violence which is that of, for instance, caste, or the violence of the or the communal violence, which is also very much creating a sense of otherization,
Yeah.
which is getting manifest in different ways within the Sarangi tradition. So, I mean, there are all forms of violence which are acting upon this. You know, the colonial violence is definitely one, but there is also all these other forms of violence, which is also connected to how, like, the wives or the courtesans sort of start to get otherized. You know.
That's definitely correct, and early ethnomusicologists have written that the Orientalist writers' research on Hindustani music has left indelible marks on how research came to practice in North Indian music, especially. So when the upper middle class started writing and started theorizing and started classicizing North Indian music, they were very much influenced by these colonial writers who were writing about what their understanding of music is and what is right and what is wrong. Or Sarangi is an instrument of an ill repute, of talking about something which is not so-called civilized and stuff, because that was their understanding of how they were, or trying to show, what they want to write about, which had became problematic. It became extremely problematic. So we really have to see the picture from a broader lens, and that's what ethnomusicology is trying to do. You're trying to analyze music not from the point of view of, okay, technique, strings, posture, musical ideas, but also why this posture, why this person, who is it connected to, where the person is coming from, what are the social demographic, religion, and everything else, and caste. So era, what era you are kind of growing up in, which what it does is it kind of makes your lens broader and broader and broader and broader and broader, and so much that you start seeing things which you wouldn't if you're kind of zooming in the lens and only looking for a certain thing.
Yeah, and in fact, I think what Suhail is also bringing to the fore is the fact that decolonization then is not just a word, but it's literally realizing that the very filter through which we're looking at the world is a colonial filter. All of us is, we've kind of education, both in terms of education and our practices and lives. There is a certain kind of colonial influence, which to shed means to kind of deeply reflect at our own selves and at the society, and literally it's a process of unlearning.
Yeah.
So
Unlearning, and also learn from the point of view of, yes, unlearning actually is very interesting. I didn't think of like that. So you're challenging what you've already learned and then kind of relearn from a different perspective. Yes, yeah. Thank you. I'm going to use that word. That's very exciting. Thank you, Suvani.
Can
Any
I
question, thoughts? Oh,
put a
yeah.
question?
Yeah.
Yeah, if this fits in, I've heard this is going to be a bit vague because my knowledge is very little on this subject, but I've heard these allusions about pioneering works like pioneers like Bhatkhande and maybe Paluskar as well, and some caste or religious angles to their uh, derision of Khandani musicians if they were especially Muslim lineages. And since you come from a lineage yourself, can you talk a bit about that and that being played into, and also because it's related to what you were saying about indigenous musicologists being influenced by the colonial environment, and then of course Bhatkande's thing about modernization, systematization, and all that. Just anything if you can just talk about all that.
Yeah. It's not vague at all, Ashish bhai. In fact, I didn't mean to use names, but what I meant by upper middle class is these two scholars who worked with Khandani musicians very closely, by the way, in order to document and notate everything because they thought Hindustani music, they were calling it classical, but Hindustani music did not have its notational form. They were wrong. Hindustani music always had notational forms since history. But the use of using notations was different. They were not using it from the Western point of view. And what happened with these two scholars was that they were educated in the West, in England, so they were very much under the influence of how music should be presented in a very Western kind of a way. It should have its own theory, irrespective of we already had a theory, but our ideas and perception of theory were different. So they kind of developed that insecurity of we should classicize. We should really come to a point where our music should not really present itself in a Western way, but somehow on the same lines. And they both tried to redeem and sacralize and kind of theoretize the music according to their own understanding. So that actually became quite problematic, for especially Khandani musicians, because it kind of generated more and more discriminatory attitudes towards Hindustani musicians, which is still practiced today, and Hindustani musicians, especially Khandani musicians, kept getting marginalized and not getting not getting acknowledgement as they used to, or they should get. So this is another Pandora's box, and then there's a lot going on in terms of what people say and ideas. There is a fantastic book by Janki Berklee, which I encourage you all to read. It's called Two Men in Music. So two men here are, as Ashish was saying, Bhatkhande and Paluskar. And this book is a fantastically historical ethnomusicological research which kind of raises these issues, and also has amazing interviews and amazing stories and how this process of classicizing was happening. So it's a critical view which I encourage you to look into. Two Men in Music by Janki Berklee, which will give you a much of a deeper understanding of what is happening and how the classical ideas of Bhatkhande and Paluskar kind of deteriorated the understanding of music at times. But yeah, coming from a Khandani music lineage, my grandfather did not agree with a lot of theoretical ideas Bhatkhande and Paluskar taught. For example, he did not believe in Tat system, which was created by Bhatkhande, which a lot of Dhrupad musicians don't believe as well, because it doesn't work. It just doesn't work, that categorization. And there are many different examples. And also the Aroha concept, ascending and descending concept, doesn't work. My grandfather never taught me a rag with Aroha. Because as I was saying in the beginning, a rag is not an Aroha, but these are the rags are phrases which gives its personality, which gives it sonic shape in order to color and heighten the mind. It is not about it's not about that. Okay, and there are many other ways of not looking at how theory or even notational form is being perceived in Khandani music, which are kind of challenging Bhatkhande's ideas. And in fact, in one of my chapters of my dissertation, I have kind of decoded a 1970s recording of 3 Sarangi players, and kind of identified the concept of Merukhand, which I just showed you, which has also been mentioned in Sangeet Ratnakara, to challenge what Bhatkhande said about Khandani musicians, that they lacked scientific and methodological ideas in their music practice. And what mine and also a lot of ethnomusicologists' argument is that scientific and methodological and theoretical ideas were omnipresent in Hindustani music pedagogy, music practice and performance and performativity, in order to get into an embodiment of what performance identifies itself as in Hindustani music. So I hope I answered that question for Ashish Bhai.
Hi.
Yeah, thanks.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, I'd like to preface my question by I suppose, clarifying my position in relation to this discussion. I'm not a practitioner or performer of music. I'm not a student at GMI. Early in the lecture, you'd played something and you briefly said that a connoisseur of Hindustani music, someone who was knowledgeable would know what rag you were playing. I'm not that either. I am, however, an avid listener. I listen to music affectively with a capital A rather than technically, although I think that is a weird binary, but I'm going to use it because it's easier. So I listen to music affectively rather than technically. I also study affect as an academic. I study English and I study literary fiction. So I am familiar with how it's produced in some particular specific contexts. Something that particularly struck with me, was when you spoke of the affective processes that underlie the structures of Hindustani music. So the rag as a fundamentally affective, emotive structure and so on. And you said that the performer feels the full affect of the rag they're playing. I understood it almost as if it radiates from the performer to the listener through the act of playing or singing. And I was wondering if you might be able to speak a little more to the other side of the coin, so to speak. So processes of listening to Hindustani music affectively. Yeah, that's my question.
Well, thank you so much for that wonderful question. I mean, these are such relevant and apt observations you've done, and you don't need to be a connoisseur to consume Hindustani music or any form of music. Yes, it becomes easier. Well, even easier is not the right term. I mean, it becomes for you to identify what's happening in the rag theoretically. Correct, but I mean, you don't really need to, because music, be it Indian music or any other musical form, kind of, is so emotive and expressive. It kind of works hand in hand, and that kind of is also illustrated in affect theory as well. So as far as I understand your question, so you're asking me how affect works in a rag performance, and how does musicians feel affect by themselves and then they radiate it to the audience, right? Well, there have been a great depth of research which is going on to this subject, because you have to understand two things. Hindustani music, unlike Western classical music, in performance gets its embodiment into performance through a conversation with listener and performer. So there is a conversation which is going between a listener and a performer, and that's why when we go to Hindustani music performances, we listen to an alap, which is a prelude, an introduction to a composition, and suddenly we would hear someone says, "Ah, kya baat hai," or do this gesture, and kind of really move along with the performance, and also make these, "Oh, shabash, kya baat hai, wah, wah, wah," these kind of sounds, which are important for a musical performance to get developed, and also an affect to get into the into practice here, because that behavior, that gestural work is an evidence itself that music is being affective here, and how a musician should, or herself or themselves, should first feel affect. Well, that takes time, that takes time to practice, to understand the art form, to first move yourself and then move the audience by enjoying music yourself. So for example, if I would give you a musical example of how that would work is, so these musical phrases and these accentuations and these extended vocal techniques I'm presenting are designed in order to present that effect. They're designed to kind of, give the audience a five-dimensional sonic effect of what's happening. And then gestures play an important role. And then how I'm kind of using dynamics. Di ta na 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 tom ta na 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 dir dir dom ta na na tom ta na na dir dir da ni re ta ni. And there are many, many compositions and approaches and techniques and methodologies which does create that really out of mind and body experience for the listener and the performance. And both listener and performers are kind of inspiring and working together in order to get to a space which is unimaginable for the performance performer and also for the listener as well. That only happens in performance. I mean, I could be sitting in my room and say, oh, I've become Tansen, but when you perform in front of an audience, the the definition of you being the Tansen changes there. So I don't know if I answered your question, but I was trying my best to give you like a musical example and less of theoretical.
You did. That was really helpful. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the question. I appreciate that. Ujjwal bhai had a question. Your hand is up.
Yeah. Sorry. Wonderful, beautiful session, Suhail. Thank you so much, bhai. I mean, I just had one curiosity that, like briefly, I just want to touch upon the contribution हम जब बात कर रहे थे about V.N. Bhatkhande ji and Divya Pulaskar. I have read a bit of that book, Two Men in Music, which is a wonderful, wonderful book. मुझे मेरा एक बस ये था कि it's not a question but sort of an observation. लेकिन wouldn't we consider that as one of the steps to democratize Hindustani music, or which led Hindustani music into the people and the masses? Because unlike today, I mean, there was no technology, and of course now we have so many things to get an idea about how the music is happening in the society. That definitely I would love to actually explore what kind of systems we had before that. If sure, there are documents which I don't have access to, and that's kind of that's the state that but I would love to wouldn't you say that that was a very crucial step in sort of getting the Hindustani music into somewhere into masses, and by opening like a Lahore में जैसे एक वो भातखंडे School of Music मुझे याद है, I think
Morris
उसका
College.
नाम
It was called Morris College.
Morris College, yes. So uske basis on the basis of that curriculum and those studies, they went upon to universities and stuff like that, which was later on followed. So definitely, I'm not too sure, but I think somewhere I think Puluskarji or somebody says that I think there is a statement that probably they're not looking at developing or making musicians in that process, but probably a good audience, because I think they were also in that impression that you can't really become musicians by learning in the certain institutions, and of course they were there, and I think they had they had in mind that there is a certain respect and essential to learn from as you said, Sina Basina Talim is necessary from a certain group, but that's what I think. But it's still, I think it led to some sort of a mass movement in terms of getting Hindustani music or Indian music out there. Although I mean, of course, there are contentions that we can argue and say of course the concept of nationalism and how Hindustani music got linked to nationalism, and at that point of time, and certain religions and stuff like that. But that's what I thought. Would we consider that one of the steps to first steps or initial steps to democratize music post, especially post independence, that when this state was in a sort of state of confusion? Also, there's so many things happening economically, politically, and stuff like that. That's it. Thank you.
No, thank you so much for that great thought, and I think all these questions are relevant. So when we use the term democratize, ethnomusicology and ethnomusicologists have revealed that the ideas of democratizing Hindustani music had begun even before Badkhande and Paluskar jumped into the research analysis of Hindustani music. How? I'll tell you. Who was Tansen? He was an upper caste, high societal performer, right? Kalavant. So these were the music specialists of their era in Mughal times. When Kalavant started to, when the Mughal era started to demolished, Kalavant started fading, and then another caste of musicians came into the music practice called Dhari. Behram Khan is one of the most prominent names, a Drupadiya of that particular religion. And also, Ujjwal bhai, we have to understand that all these hereditary musicians we're talking about were all Hindus. They were not Arabs. Right? They accepted Islam for various reasons through Sufi movement and stuff. So what the problem here, what happened is the way the public accessibility happened through Badkhande and Paluskar. You know, it was the way on Hindu nationalistic ideas, these ideas of nationalistic, national-centric ideas which were imposed while working with hereditary musicians. And some of their papers and their music conference speeches are explicit, you know. They're explicit, and they were fiery remarks after their speeches into the conferences. So democratization happened at the time of Behram Khan when he started initiating an even lower class music into performance practice by revealing the ideas of Meru Khand, which was not accessible to anyone else apart from Kalavant, right? And see, yes, public, because there were no courts, you know, up till that point, music was a consumption of the high art. So it was not available. And how would be it available for public? Because, you know, this is not the music which is everyone's cup of tea, and it is still not a mass reach. If you're saying that it has become a mass appeal, it has not. It cannot. I argue. Yes, people, it's an acquired taste, and it will be. Because you need to have certain kind of an idea of where it's coming from, you know, certain knowledge, which is fine, you know, it's not a problem. I think what Badkhande ji and Paluskar ji did is phenomenal. It's exemplary work. You know, they were documenting things. They were building up new ideas. They were also giving jobs to Khandani musicians, by the way. Tirakma Khan Sahab was at Morris College and so many other hereditary musicians. However, after Badkhande ji, when the top class hereditary musicians went, the ones after them who were not that top class were kicked out. And that became problematic. Those ideas were perceived into like really horrible things, and we're still dealing with those concepts, right? And as I said, some of their concepts don't make sense. For example, the thought system. The Aro system doesn't make any sense. In fact, thought system, ethnomusicologist Nazir Jarrah's boy criticizes. In fact, he says, where is the theory? Because that thought system is kind of, you know, based on the Mela Karta system of South Indian Carnatic music. So yes, public obviously had to be public because there were no courts. So that was the only consumption which was left for Hindustani music. And what I'm saying is a much larger argument of this rather short answer. But I am not disregarding what Badkhande and Paluskar did here, by the way. What I'm saying is we have to now look at a rather broader lens and kind of identify that the indelible mark, as you both said, has done to the research, and the ideas of communalism and discriminations and sacralizations and the concept of purity this has done, right? We have to understand this music has evolved over a period of time, like all music has, right? Even Western classical music has, which challenges the idea of purity, which really kind of invokes us and provokes us to think, rethink, relearn, unlearn, as Suvani was saying, what purity is and how purity works. Probably there is no purity. So we really have to figure out what do we mean by purity when we are trying to understand what purity is. and then somehow acknowledge what has been done and the efforts and work that has already been done. So yeah, to answer your question, democratization, I argue it wasn't democratized by them. In fact, the democratization started even before them. Yes, theoretizing and notational form came through them. Yeah.
Can I jump in just to add to Ujjwal and your response? Just a very brief thing about Ujjwal bhai, democratization. I just wanted to introduce this idea. I mean, obviously it's problematic and oversimplified, but I think when it comes to especially arts and the so-called high arts, especially, democratization is not necessarily a good word, right? And often it's antithetical to the intrinsic spirit of the art form itself, because if you're trying to touch perfection, or at least approach it and come close, then, an art form being diluted enough or made palatable to a larger number of people can be antithetical to that purpose of pursuing excellence or perfection. If you think of someone like Swami Haridas, not even coming to a darbar of Akbar Shahenshah, in order to maintain that spiritual purity that was supposedly behind his, musical intentions, that's the exact antithesis of democracy. So just to throw that in the mix.
Yeah, no, thank you so much, Ashif bhai. And just to add to that as well, I mean, this we can just go on and on. There's so many layers. We also have to understand the ancient Hindustani music was only practiced by upper class Brahmins who were not ready to share it to other classes. So when Amir Khusro as a scholar entered into the courts and he was trying to work with Nayak Bhikshu, who was a high-art Brahmin, Nayak Bhikshu did not want to give the knowledge, pass on the knowledge. So Amir Khusro had to imbibe the Persian knowledge he was concerned, which in order to have musical evolution enhancements. So the democratization, yes, it is problematic. It is not a good word, especially for Hindustani music, but quote unquote it has been going on from before by these mixing things and also make it more accessible to people, for the music to grow, for music to have a life, to music to spread, to music to get researched upon and then being practiced. You have to understand that first.
Okay, thank you so much, Ashish, Ujjwal, for also contributing to the conversations. We've actually gone a bit over time, and I would have totally loved to kind of keep this going. But with a very heavy heart, I'm having to kind of now just sort of suggest that we close the session. A huge thank you, Suhail. This has been very, very illuminating, very captivating, and I think you've shared ideas with us that will now keep getting unfolded and processed by us in the sessions to come. So immense gratitude for that. Thanks everybody for joining in, and all of you who've taken time out to be here and contribute to the session. Thanks a lot. Hopefully, I think the session will be edited and uploaded at some point soon. And yes, I hope we can continue to stay on this register of,
Yeah, I'm happy to answer questions via email and stuff if you guys have any thoughts. So Suvani, feel free to share my email.
Totally. I mean, I have a bunch of questions still which I couldn't get to, so I think for sure I'll hope that the students also.
I'm happy to share. I'm happy to share references and readings and stuff if people are more interested. Yeah.
Yes,
but
definitely.
Thank you so much. This has been great for me as well. Yeah, and it's kind of really exhilarating, and just to talk about my research, I learned a lot. And thank you, Ujjwal bhai, for all the relevant
questions.
Thank you,
Suhail. It was a
Ashish bhai
beautiful
and everyone else.
Thank you so much. On behalf of everybody, and wonderful. Yeah, it's so good to see you after such a long time, and hearing you talk. I think you won't get enough chances. Personally, you and me, and a couple of us, we know each other from such a long time, but never had an opportunity to. So it's great that JMI and Suvani, Adi, Megha, you guys are doing great work, and I think this is a great initiative. Thank you, Sohail. Wonderful, bhai. It's great to hear you, play and, lovely. Wonderful.
No,
So proud of you.
thank you so
Great.
much. I'd also like to acknowledge a very good musician called Fakhruddin Ghafari, Sina Bhai, who is hiding from us, but thank you for joining us here,
Sina
Fakhruddin Bhai,
bhai.
wherever you are. Oh,
There he is. There he is.
Thank you.
Wow, this has been great. Thank you so much, everybody. And as Suvani said, there were so many questions because like every sort of answers you gave and every question everybody was asking, like it was like this Pandora's box would open up more and more discussions. Like even when we talk about the thought system, like how embedded even the RO Avro is so much embedded in our pedagogy. Like even from the grassroots level of how we're teaching music now, like the RO Avro system, all of that, like those conversations are so embedded into our terminology, our pedagogical system. So and how you gave an the idea of like there's a completely different contrasting view and a historical perspective. It would be great to sort of understand and how we can maybe enlighten our students into those kind of practices and concepts and theories. So has been a very enlightening session in that sense.
Absolutely.
Thank you, and I learned a lot. And as I said, I mean, this is a work in progress. I'm very happy to share what I know. Thank you so much. Have a lovely rest of your night, guys. Bye.
Thank you. Have a lovely day.
Bye, everybody.
Bye. Bye, everyone.
Thank you, GMI. Thank you, Sohail.